Hello learners, this is Habiba with Excel with me. If you like the video, please do like, share, subscribe and comment below. Let's start today's class, that is Teacher Eligibility Test Paper 2, Social Studies Class 8, theme is third one, that is Political Systems and Governance. Let's start with the practice questions. First, 10th chapter, Landlords and Tenants under British and the Nizam. What was the zamindars' land on which the labourers worked called? This was called their self-cultivated land or khud kasht lands. What were two aspects the zamindars had? That is the collection of land revenue from ordinary peasants and owning lands as landlords. What were the two kinds of peasants? Those who were independent land owning cultivators paying land revenue through the zamindar, and those who were tenants of the landlords. Who introduced the permanent settlement in 1793? Cornwallis, when he was the Governor General. Now, what were the terms of the permanent settlement or zamindari settlement? That is, zamindars were given the powers to collect the revenues agreed upon in auctions. Now, which districts of ceded to the British by the Nizam on account of debt in maintaining the British contingent? They were Bellary, Anantapur, Kadapa and Kurnool. Who was appointed as the principal collector of Bellary, Anantapur, Kadapa and Kurnool districts in November 1800? He was Thomas Munro. At that time, the ceded districts were in a complete anarchy. There were 8 palegars or petty chiefs in this area. Now, Munro first subdued the palegars and disbanded their armed followers. Now, who devised the Raitwari system, which was introduced in the entire South India and later in Western India? That was Thomas Munro. Now, let's see two statements here. Riot means a cultivator. The Raitwari means peasant tenure. Both statements are correct. Due to whose untiring efforts was an anicut across the Godavari river at Dhawaleshwaram completed in 1849. That was because of Sir Arthur Cotton. It brought immediate prosperity to the district, which had suffered acutely from severe famine in 1833. Now, when was an anicut built over the Krishna river at Vijayawada? It was in the year 1854. After 1857, which canal was built to bring waters to the dry areas of Rayalaseema? That was Kurnool-Kadapa Canal. When was the Civil War in America started? In the year 1861. That is, British factories turned to India for supply of cotton because that was the result because of this Civil War. When was the Civil War in the USA ended? Ended in 1865. Started in 1861 and ended in the year 1865. The demand for Indian cotton fell and so did its price also. During the colonial period, the peasants were forced to do what on the personal land of the landlords? That was vetti. Vetti means work without wages. Which report says that the peasants do not try to dig wells on their lands or irrigate them, nor do they try to burn their fields or dig drains or use fertilizers. That was the government report written in 1878. Now, in the Hyderabad state under the Nizam rule, what were many forms of subordinate chieftaincies which ruled like independent chiefs? They were Jagirdars, Samstha Namdars and Inamdars. Now, these chieftaincies collected revenue from the lands under them and gave a small part to whom as peshkash and kept the remaining with them. That was to the Nizams. What was the Nizam's personal Jagir called? That was called Sarf-e-Khas. Who ruled Hyderabad state under the British and had to follow their policies? The Nizams. In the first half of the 19th century, they tried to collect maximum land revenue through Deshmukhs. Now let's see two statements here. The old landlords were compensated with an annual payment called rusum. They were also given patta rights of full ownership over the land and adjoining wastelands and forests. Both are correct. Now let's see the statements again. The large landlords were called doras. The doras lived in large fortified houses called gadi. Both are correct. Who were the landlords who owned about 1 lakh acres? That was Visnuri Ramachandra Reddy and Janna Reddy Pratap Reddy. When was the most severe famine, commonly known as the Ganjam famine, occurred? During the years 1865 to 66. What were the famous peasant movements that took organized forms? The Deccan riots of 1860s, Rampa, fituries, Moppila agitations. When the peasants of Awadh in Uttar Pradesh took out huge processions to protest against the zamindars who were extracting money from them? In the year 1920-22. Why were the peasants formed Kisan Sabhas? To carry their agitation forward and demanded abolition of landlordism, reduction of land revenue and control over money lenders. Now the next chapter, the 11A, National Movement, the early phase from 1885 to 1919. In the year 1866, who organized the East India Association in London to discuss the Indian questions? That was Dadabhai Naoroji. During 1866 to 1885, who were the leaders who organized associations in Calcutta, Pune, Bombay and Madras to discuss the problems faced by Indians in those provinces? That was Surendranath Banerjee, Justice M.G. Ranade, Badruddin Tayyabji, K.C. Telang and G. Subramaniam. Who presided over the first session of the Indian National Congress INC at Bombay in December 1885? That was W.C. Banerjee and attended by 72 delegates from different parts of India. The early leaders played an important role in establishing the Congress. Which were the early leaders? They were Dadabhai Naoroji, Feroz Shah Mehta, Badruddin Tayyabji, W.C. Banerjee, Surendranath Banerjee, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, S. Subramanya Iyer and others were largely from Bombay, Madras, Calcutta and A.O. Hume, a retired British official. Now in the year 1886, how many delegates to the Congress were elected by different local organizations and groups, indicating its popularity in 1 year? There were 436 delegates. Who were the delegates here? Mostly lawyers, journalists, traders, industrialists, teachers and landlords. Now who was the delegate and first woman graduate from Calcutta? She was Kadambari Ganguly. During the first 20 years, what were the Congress led by the leaders known as? They were moderate nationalists, who studied the economic impact of the British rule and concluded that the British were draining India of her wealth through taxes and other means and leaving her poorer and poorer. They were leaders like Naoroji, R.C. Dutt and Ranade, who carried on their agitation through newspapers, public lectures. They were moderates. Moderates adopted which policy? Pray, petition and protest. Triple P we can remember as pray, petition and protest. When was the Indian national movement took a major leap forward? With the start of the Swadeshi movement around 1903. What was one major trigger for the movement? The Swadeshi movement? The proposal for partitioning of Bengal into East and West Bengal in 1903 by Curzon, Lord Curzon. When the government partitioned Bengal in the year 1905, very important date. The Swadeshi movement gave a stimulus to APC Race Bengal Chemical Works and encouraged Jamshedji Tata of Bombay to open his famous steel plant in Bihar. In the next Congress session 1905, who were the extremist nationalists led in favor of extending the movement to the rest of India and to demand for full-fledged freedom or Swaraj. They were Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal and Lala Lajpat Rai. Lal Bal Pal they were called as. Who gave the famous slogan, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it? That was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Who wanted to move away from the earlier strategy of submitting petitions to government to mobilizing the masses against the British rule and forcing the British to give up and go? They were the extremist nationalists. They called the earlier strategy as mendicancy or begging for arms. Who were the old leaders who wanted to continue on a more gradual pace of movement and felt that the masses were as yet not ready for a full-scale movement for freedom and self-rule? Moderate nationalists said this. When was the partition of Bengal went into effect and was observed in Bengal as a day of mourning? That was on 16th October 1905. When and where was the difference between the two sections of leaders? They were moderates and extremists, grew and eventually led to a split of the Congress. That was in the year 1905 in the Surat session. The national movement revived again in 1915 when Tilak came back from his exile and joined hands with Annie Besant to launch which movement? That was Home Rule movement. The two factions of the Congress united again. They were moderates and extremists in the year 1916 through which pact? That was the Lucknow Pact. When was the First World War broke out with Britain, France, Russia on one side and Germany and its allies on the other side? That was in the year 1914. Where was the Krishna Patrika started? In 1902. That was in Machilipatnam. Who was one of the founders of the Krishna Patrika paper and from 1902 associated as its sub-editor? That was Mutnuri Krishna Rao. In 1907, he became its editor and continued to serve the journal till he died in the year 1945. Now the next chapter, 11b, National Movement, the last phase, 1919 to 1947. When was Gandhiji arrived in India from South Africa, led Indians in that country in non-violent marches against racist restrictions? That was in the year 1915. Where were Gandhiji's earliest interventions in local movements led peasants in their struggles against unfair terms and excessive taxes? That was in Champaran and Kheda. Where Gandhiji led a successful mill workers strike in 1918. That was in Ahmedabad. Mahatma Gandhi, let's understand the main important points related to Mahatma Gandhi. He launched Champaran campaign in 1917, then Khaira protest movement in 1918 and participated in Ahmedabad textile workers agitation in 1918. These are the three most important movements or agitations. In the year 1919, Gandhiji gave a call for satyagraha against which act? That was against the Rowlatt Act. Now, Gandhiji asked the Indian people to observe which day as a day of non-violent opposition to the Rowlatt Act, as a day of humiliation and prayer and hartal, that is strike. That was 6th April 1919. Satyagraha Sabhas were set up to launch the movement here. What was turned out to be the first all India struggle against the British government, although it was largely restricted to cities? That was the Rowlatt Satyagraha. The worst example of these atrocity was the firing on a meeting of unarmed people at Jalianwala Bagh in Amritsar in Punjab by General Dyer on 13th April, in which about 400 people were killed and thousands injured. Very important, many questions can come here. Where this Jalianwala Bagh massacre occurred? That was in Amritsar, Punjab. And who was responsible for this? That was General Dyer. And on which date? That was on 13th April. How many were killed? 400 people were killed and thousands injured. Now, on learning about the massacre, who expressed the pain and anger of the country by renouncing, that is refusing his knighthood title? That was Rabindranath Tagore. Now, what is secular here? The government should neither interfere in the affairs of a religion nor allow any religion to interfere with the government. Where and when was a group of Muslim landlords and Nawabs formed the All India Muslim League? That was at Dhaka in the year 1906. The league supported the partition of Bengal. It desired separate electorates for Muslims, a demand conceded by the government in the year 1909. What was formed in 1915 with the objective of uniting Hindus and reconverting those who had converted to other religions? That was Hindu Mahasabha. Who headed the Hindu Mahasabha? Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya. They tried to counter the Muslim League and the influence of other religious groups in India. The Khilafat issues was one of such causes also. In 1920, the British imposed a harsh treaty on the Turkish Sultan or Khalifa. Now, who were the leaders of the Khilafat agitation? They were Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. Now, who supported Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali call and urged the Congress to campaign against Punjab wrongs, that is Jalianwala Bagh massacre, the Khilafat wrong, and demanded Swaraj, that was Gandhiji. In which session of the Congress in 1920, Gandhiji was acknowledged as the leader of the Congress? That was in the Nagpur session. Now let's see the facts or statements related to Nagpur session. Now the objective of the Congress was changed to the achievement of Swaraj by all legitimate and peaceful means. Non-cooperation was accepted as the means to get Swaraj. These were the two statements. Now, when was the non-cooperation movement gained momentum? That was in the year 1921 to 22. Now, let's see the statements related to non-cooperation movement, very, very important. Many lawyers such as Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das, C. Rajgopalachari and Asaf Ali gave up their practices. British titles were surrendered and legislature were boycotted. People lit public bonfires of foreign cloth. The imports of foreign cloth fell drastically between 1920 and 1922. Now, who added a campaign for people to spin their own cotton on a charkha? This cloth is known as khadi. That is Gandhiji. In every house, this spread the desire to make the country self-reliant. Where was the center of nationalist activity and the participation was very widespread? That was in Guntur district. What was the highlight of the non-cooperation movement? The famous Chirala Perala movement. That was in South Andhra Pradesh. About 15,000 people of the town led by Duggirala Gopala Krishnaiya refused to pay the taxes and migrated to a new settlement called Ramnagar. What was the Pullari Satyagraha? The forest Satyagraha in Palnati Taluka of Guntur district and also in Raichoti Taluka of Kadapa district. Now, where did the people declare Gandhi Raj and attacked police parties? That was in many villages of Palnadu. The Pullari Satyagraha led under whose leadership? That was Kannaganti Hanumantu. When did Mahatma Gandhi abruptly called off the non-cooperation movement? That was in February 1922. A crowd of peasants set fire to a police station in Chauri Chaura. That was a famous incident, Chauri Chaura incidents. Who were the leaders argued that the party should fight elections to the councils and enter them in order to influence government policies? That was C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru. When was the Civil Disobedience Movement launched? That was in the year 1930. What were the two important developments of the mid-1920s? The formation of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, that is RSS, a Hindu organization, and the Communist Party of India. Who was the revolutionary nationalist active in this period, mid-1920s? That was Bhagat Singh. The Indian National Congress met at Lahore in 1929 under whose presidency? That was Jawaharlal Nehru. When did the Congress declare that the attainment of Purna Swaraj was its goal and resolved to launch Civil Disobedience Movement to achieve it? That was Lahore session in 1929. Which day did Congress Working Committee decided that it should be observed as the day of Purna Swaraj? That was 26th January. Where and when did Gandhiji decided to break the government salt laws, that is making salt very expensive for the common people by manufacturing salt by themselves? That was at Dandi, a small village on the Gujarat sea coast on March 12, 1930 at Sabarmati Ashram, Ahmedabad. Gandhiji and his 78 companions began the 735-kilometer trek from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi. This was covered in 24 days. Now, when did Gandhiji reach Dandi, picked up a handful of salt and broke the salt law as a symbol of the Indian people's refusal to live under the British made laws and therefore under the British rule. That was on 6th April 1930. The combined struggles of the Indian people bore fruit when the Government of India Act of 1935 prescribed provincial autonomy and the government announced elections to the provincial legislatures in 1937. Now, the Congress formed governments in 7 out of 11 provinces. In September 1939, after 2 years of Congress rule in the provinces, the Second World War broke out. Now, let's see the statements here. Critical of Hitler, Congress leaders were ready to support the British war effort, but in return, they wanted that India be granted independence after the war. The British refused to concede the demand. The Congress ministers resigned in protest. All the statements are correct. Now, the statements again. Britain wanted to use the people and money of India for the Second World War. Congress demanded that in return for support in the war, India should be given self-rule. Both are correct. When did the Congress Working Committee met and passed a resolution stating clearly that British rule in India must end immediately? That was on 8th August 1942 at Bombay. Who wanted to gain control over the whole world and declared war on Britain, France, USSR and other countries? That was Germany, led by Hitler and his Nazi party. Now, let's see the facts related to World War II that started in the year 1939 and ended up in the year 1945. USA joined on the side of England, France and USSR called Allied countries. Germany was supported by Japan and Italy. One of the worst wars in human history broke out in 1939 and lasted till 1945 when USSR's armies captured Berlin and the USA dropped atom bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Now, most people who cherished the values of democracy and freedom opposed Hitler and supported the Allied countries in the war. However, in India, it created a dilemma as Indians were at the same time fighting the British. All the statements are very, very important. Who was a Swarajist and a radical nationalist? He was Subhash Chandra Bose. Who organized the Indian National Army INA with the cooperation of Raj Bihari Bose in Burma and Andamans? That was Subhash Chandra Bose. Who helped the INA, Indian National Army, consisted of more than 60,000 soldiers in this fight? They were Japanese. Where was the provincial government of independent India, Azad Hind, set up on 21st October 1943? That was in Singapore. With which slogan the INA crossed the frontiers of Burma and entered India? Dilli Chalo, on to Delhi. Where was the Indian flag hoisted in March 1944? That was in Kohima. The launching of a counter-offensive by the British in the winter of 1945-44 and the final defeat of Japan in the Second World War, what happened here? The INA movement collapsed. When was Subhash Chandra Bose reported to have lost his life in an air crash while going from Bangkok to Tokyo? On August 23, 1945. The period after 1940 was characterized by intensive activities of radical organizations like the Communist Party, trade unions, women's organizations, Kisan Sabhas and Dalit organizations. Who were the active participants in the movements of 1940s? The under-tenants in Malabar, tenants in Tebga, Vettikas and cultivators in Telangana. Who were the communists active and led the movements from below? All India Kisan Sabha, a peasant front and intelligentsia through All India People's Theatres Association and All India Students Federation. Now in the year 1940, the Muslim League had moved a resolution demanding independent states for Muslims in which areas? That was the northwestern and eastern areas of the country. Now let's see the statements. Elections to the provinces were again held in 1946. The Congress did well in the general constituencies, but the League's success in the seats reserved for Muslims was spectacular. It persisted with its demand for Pakistan. All are correct. In March 1946, the British cabinet sent which 3-member mission to Delhi to examine this demand and to suggest a suitable political framework for a free India? That was Stanford Cripps, Pettit Lawrence, Alexander. Now next statements. As the proposal of the cabinet mission failed, the Muslim League decided on the mass agitation in support of its demand for Pakistan. It announced 16th August 1946 as Direct Action Day. Both are correct. Now, who was appointed Viceroy in early 1947 was not able to resolve the differences between the Muslim League and the Congress Party. He was Louis Mountbatten. In 1947, it was agreed that India would be split into two. That was Muslim-controlled Pakistan and Hindu-dominated India. At last, India became independent on 15th August 1947, while Pakistan celebrates its independence on 14th August. That was the end of this session. If you like the video, please do like, share, subscribe, comment below. I will come up with next chapters in the next class. Thanks for your attention and time. Happy learning.